So the first one is around a question that has emerged from my research, around the question of why is it that success is so hard to sustain? If you look across the sweep of business history, most companies which at one point are widely regarded as unassailably successful, a decade or two later you find them in the middle of the pack and often at the bottom of the heap. And what I would like to describe for you now is why this happens. And the reason why this is important is in starting a new company, you want to be sure that the competitors will not kill you. You want to be sure that you kill them. And this is the model that has emerged from my research. And what it entails is, I will describe this model in the context of the steel industry. But I hope that you will see that this process is at work in literally every industry and also at the level of every economy. So I'm going to put on the vertical axis the quality of steel over time. Now there historically have been two ways to make steel. I'm assuming that not a lot of you have made a lot of steel yet in your lives. But most of the world's steel historically was made in massive integrated steel companies, as I've described in the upper left. It would require today about 8 million euros to build an integrated steel company. There's a new way to do it that we call a mini mill. Mini mills melt scrap in electric furnaces. And you could probably put 3 of these electric furnaces here on the stage. The most important dimension of a mini mill is that they can make steel of any given quality in a mini mill for 20% lower cost than you can make it in an integrated mill. Now just think about this for a minute. Imagine that you were a CEO of a steel company, an integrated steel company somewhere in the world. You're making commodities. Here is a new technology, the mini mill, that would reduce the full cost of making steel by 20%. Don't you think you'd adopt this new technology? And yet, not a single integrated steel company anywhere in the world has yet built and operated a mini mill. And I want to just describe a little bit about what this technology involves, and then describe why smart people can't do what makes sense. So the integrated steel companies are massive operations. But the mini mills, because the way they work is they melt scrap in electric furnaces. And because you can make molten steel in these small chambers, they don't have to scale up the downstream processing steps in order to make it work. And that's why we call these things mini mills. Now, in the steel market, there are tiers of the market, just as there are in every of the markets that we can compete against. At the bottom of the steel market is concrete reinforcing bar, or rebar. Almost all of us could make rebar if we tried. At the high end of the market is sheet steel that is used to make appliances and cars. It is very hard to make. Now, at the beginning of this story, the integrated steel companies were making the full range of these products. Mini mills became technologically viable in the late 1960s. Because these mini mills were melting scrap in these electric furnaces, the quality that they could make was very poor. And in fact, the only market that would buy what the mini mills made was the concrete reinforcing bar way down at the bottom, because there are almost no specifications for rebar anyway. And then once you buried it in cement, you couldn't verify whether it had met spec or not. And so the market was a perfect product for crummy products. The reaction of the integrated mills when the mini mills attacked was they were actually quite happy to get out of the rebar business. because their gross margins were only 7%. And it just made no sense for them to defend a market that generated gross margins of 7%, where in this tier of the market, angle iron and thicker bar and rod, they could generate gross margins of 12%. So as the integrated mills expanded their capacity to make rebar, the integrated steel companies just lopped off the lowest profit part of their product line. Then when they added all of the remaining numbers up, their profitability improved as they got out of rebar. It just made it made no sense for the integrated steel companies to defend a 7% margin business when in the next tier up, angle iron and thicker bar and rod, they could make 12% gross margins. The mini mills, because they had a 20% cost advantage, they got a lot of money by getting into the rebar market, even as the integrated mills got out of it. And so I was quite happy, the two companies, with the arrangement. But then in 1979, an interesting thing happened. That was the year when the mini mills finally succeeded in driving the last high-cost integrated player out of the rebar market. If you look at what happened to the price of rebar in 1979, the price of rebar collapsed by 20%. There's just a subtle fact about strategy that nobody had thought about before, and that is a low-cost strategy only works when you have a high-cost competitor in your market. And as soon as the high-cost integrated mills had been driven out of rebar, then it was just low-cost mini mill fighting against low-cost mini mill in a commodity business. And very quickly prices drove the cost of rebar down to the point where nobody could make money. So what are these mini mills going to do? They looked at market and they realized, oh my gosh, if we could just make bigger and better steel, we'd make money again. Because up there, they made 12% gross margins. And so they stretched their ability into making those products. And as they attacked the angle iron and bar and rod of the market, the reaction of the integrated mills was they were just happy to get out of that business. It just never made sense to defend a 12% margin when up here in structural steel, they could make gross margins of 18%. So the very same thing happened. As the integrated mills lopped off the lowest profit part of their business and added up the remaining numbers, their profitability improved by getting out of angle iron and bar and rod. The integrated mills, because they had a 20% cost advantage, they rolled lots of money by getting into the products that the integrated mills got out of. And so they're quite happy. Both of them are making better profit. But that fell apart in 1984. That was the year when the mini mills finally succeeded in driving the last high-cost integrated players out of the angle iron and bar and rod market. If you look at what happened to the prices of those products in that year, the prices collapsed by 20%. And the reward to the mini mills for their victory was they couldn't make any money. So what are these companies going to do? They just have to figure out how to make even bigger and better steel. And as they attacked the structural steel part of the market, the reaction of the integrated mills was they were just happy to get out of that business. Because as they lopped off the lowest profit part of their product line and looked at the remaining numbers, their profitability improved by getting out of the 18% margin business, because in the structural steel business, the margins were so much better. And just as they made profitability by getting out, the mini mills made profitability by getting in. And the whole thing played its way out again. It just didn't make any sense for these guys to defend it. These guys took it over. And the mini mills made good money until 1996. That was the year when they finally drove out the last high-cost integrated player out of structural steel. The price of structural steel collapsed by 20%, and the mini mills had to get into the sheet steel business. And as they attacked that tier of the business, the reaction of the integrated mills was they were happy to get out of the commodity sheet because in specialty steels, the margins are so much better. And so there you have the business. Today, in Europe and North America, the mini mills account for about 65% of all steel production. All but one of the integrated mills has gone bankrupt. And you just think about who are the big integrated players in France and Germany and Luxembourg, the Netherlands. These have all been gone. They've gone bankrupt several times, pulled into Alcinor, which then sell itself to Mittal, because at the high end of the market, there just isn't enough volume, and they keep consolidating and consolidating, even while the mini mills come up from the bottom. Now, you notice that I was able to tell the whole story of this industry without using the words stupid managers once, because there was no stupidity involved on either side of this equation. Every time the integrated steel companies got out of the lowest profit part of their product line, their profitability improved. And every time the mini mills got into a business that the integrated mills got out of, their profitability improved. And the causal mechanism behind this phenomena of going up market is the pursuit of profit. And that's why it's so predictable.